Why, hello everyone, how are you doing this fine day? Hope you're enjoying your week. Welcome to another survival challenge, in particular a Dead by Daylight survival challenge. Today, because I don't know a whole lot about Dead by Daylight. So I have someone here who knows a lot more than me on this subject, and as we've done many times in the past, we're going to basically have a conversation about what might happen if a bunch of different random characters end up in the Dead by Daylight universe. So introduce yourself, Dan / Wizard of Introduce yourself, Dan the Tech Guy / God damn it. Introducing Dan the Tech Guy / Wizard of God damn it. Introducing today, Dan the Tech Guy / Wizard of Gaming / Babyoil Supreme. Say hello to everybody.
And you still fucked it up.
What? No, I did great. It was fun. It was great. Don't worry about it.
Wizard of Strategy, not gaming.
Oh, shit. Okay. All right. Whatever.
Hi, I'm here, Dan the Tech Guy. You may know me from his streams. Also, Wizard of Strategy, if you want to go watch some of my YouTube videos.
Yeah, he is the Bob Ross of gaming. Because I don't know a whole lot about this universe, Dead by Daylight, we talked about it a little bit before this recording, and basically just explain a little bit of the world and some of the stuff, and just kind of give us a general overview, like what kind of a world we're looking at.
Alright, so the kind of world we're looking at is a eldritch dream, almost, with the entity in complete control. Everybody who comes in here feeds the entity in one way or another, whether that's by causing fear in the survivors with their abilities as killers, or whether that's like the happiness that they feel between the rounds of the entity's game where they interact with each other and meet their siblings. All of this serves to feed the entity in one way or another as it slowly saps the emotions of anybody in its realm. And basically it's just best way to put it is, imagine if Cthulhu was a sadist and wanted to watch you die over and over and over again.
Got you. Okay. All right, cool. So I have a list right here of characters, and you made a list of characters yourself. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to pull off one of my characters, pull off one of your characters, and we'll have a quick discussion of what might happen if these characters wind up in this Dead by Daylight universe. So if you want to go first, you can, because funny enough, the first character on your list is actually one of my characters that I talk about all the time. That I didn't actually put them on my list. So you want to talk about your first character that you have?
Alright, so my first character on this list is the Lamb from Cult of the Lamb. I think he would make a phenomenal killer with some really interesting abilities. Plus, with his constant brainwashing, I feel like he could create either a problem for the entity in a way some of the other killers have, or he could end up being like really good at resetting people back to like their basic, and it would serve even more of a purpose to the entity because it would like bring all of the numbed emotion back and make it like it was the first time in the trials again.
So I actually find this character kind of interesting in this situation because it almost seems like the Lamb is the antithesis of the entity. So the entity's whole thing is about sacrificing people to feed itself and feeding off of their, I guess you said like their persona or their fear or something, like their emotion.
Any emotion that they display. So even the killers feed the entity. So that's why Trapper is like impaled with a bunch of rebar. The entity tortured him to get him to do what it wanted because he tried to fight back.
Well, it's got to be negative emotion though, right? It's not just any emotion.
No, it's any emotion. So happiness and love and affection, they all feed the entity as well, which can be seen in like any of the Valentine's Day events, or the fact that Wraith is allowed to interact with his sister, which is the spirit. Wraith and the spirit are allowed to interact, and that creates more emotion for the entity to feed on.
You would think that if that was the case, that it would almost be more viable for the entity to, instead of making a place where everyone's constantly being chased and murdered, you'd have like almost like a constant orgy or something, you know, or you try to keep everyone super, super happy and content all the time. Almost like a Monsters Inc. thing, where at the end of Monsters Inc. they come to the realization that happiness actually gives them more energy than fear. Fear always has a limit, so there's a certain point where people stop becoming afraid of things. If you just keep introducing them to it over and over again, it becomes harder and harder to make people scared. But happiness and joy can continue for as long as you put people through the happy things that they're going through. You would almost think that he would be more successful if he just had everyone be in like a super happy realm forever and just like tried to keep them all joyous. as opposed like it would still be dark and horror because he's still feeding off of those emotions. It would be like this twisted sort of thing.
So there's two reasons for that. One, gameplay. The game would not be interesting in the slightest if it was just happy-go-lucky prance around, right?
It would be a different game.
It wouldn't be Dead by Daylight. It'd be Alive by Limelight. I don't know.
It would almost be like We Happy Few, where it's like everyone, the whole society is taking this drug.
Oh yeah, where like everybody is based on the pill. If you stop taking that pill, you see the world for the way it really is.
Yeah. Or The Truman Show. That would be another one. The Truman Show would be a Truman Show game.
The second reason, and the more lore base, is that it is far easier to create a source of fear and requires far less of the entity's power than it would be to create things that constantly make people happy. So it would have to expend way more energy to keep making those people happy and get diminishing returns on that happiness instead of creating those moments of unparalleled fear that you experience during the trials as a survivor.
Okay. So the entity, despite being like this dark god, actually has some pretty hard limits as to what he can and can't do. If he can't do that, make him happy because it stresses out his power, that's a pretty hard limitation.
So the entity does have its limits, and as far as like we know about it, it can pull all sorts of different creatures. One of the most recent collabs was with Dungeons & Dragons, where they pulled in the Lich Vecna, who in Dungeons & Dragons lore is one of the most powerful of all time. Vecna himself, being brought in, now has a mark that locks his power in the trials. And there are other characters where that mark is insinuated. So when these like super powerful beings are brought into the realm, the entity has to limit their power in a way. Otherwise, it could eventually be overthrown by Vecna, because one dark god can be replaced with another.
It kind of acts like the chest plate that Hulk gets in Planet Hulk, where it's like a plot device to keep Hulk weaker so that he can actually fit in the story. Because otherwise he would just dominate the entire planet and there'd be no story.
That's what the mark kind of serves to do. And the entity as well has a limited reach outside of its own reality. In its reality, it is the ultimate god. And it feeds better off of sources of immediately heightened emotion than it does off prolonged sources. The entity gains more from something like a fear, or from a heightened fear response from like a chase followed by the immediate pain of a survivor being hooked than it would from a survivor just being happy for 3 days, because that's just the same emotion and it would gain diminishing returns over time.
So he needs a large variety of emotions that are at heightened levels constantly.
It's that immediate response that like when it's 3 a.m. in your room and you see something and you jump 10 feet off the bed.
Which makes sense because you told me earlier off camera, you were telling me that there's a limit to it. The survivors, they can only be killed so many times before he can no longer take that emotion from it. Now, you made it sound the way you were saying it that it's because they literally are no longer capable of having that emotion because they've all been drained from them. But is there any chance that that's actually because they just straight up no longer feel that emotion because that fear and that, like, once you feel that pain that many times, it doesn't bother me anymore?
So the lore is kind of vague on that point. It's very much either the entity has like completely drained that emotion and so they just kind of are numb, or they just grew numb over time. It's the same reason that some of the killers that have appeared don't provide anything directly, because they inspire so much fear because they are such a new and different threat to the survivors. They are allowed to stay in the realm.
Gotcha. So getting back to the lamb, the reason why I think it's kind of the antithesis of it is because the entire idea is that he feeds off of emotions, but he does this through the murder, torture, and all this kind of stuff of the people around him. The lamb's powers are directly tied to the number of followers and the devotion that he has. He doesn't want his people to be afraid of him. He wants his people to love him. He doesn't get anything from murdering and torturing and killing people unless he needs to sacrifice them for others, but he needs their devotion. So he would actually probably have virtually no power in the entity's realm at all if he doesn't have people who are devoted to him and worshiping him. So he would actually not want to kill these people unless he can get them to somehow be devoted to him and it just be a part of their devotion for them to sacrifice themselves for the lamb, perhaps something like that. Like, actually, it could be possible that if the Lamb goes in and begins to indoctrinate the people there and mind control, he can actually get to the point where they're no longer afraid of death, because none of his followers are afraid of death due to their devotion to him. They kill themselves freely, and they're okay with being tortured and all this kind of stuff. Many of them are, even cannibalism and stuff like this, based on their devotion to the Lamb. That he could possibly start feeding off of their devotion and pulling away from the entity, and the entity feeding off of those emotions, unless the entity can also feed off of the devotion in some way. Maybe you can argue that there's some kind of emotion tied to the devotion that they feel, but I think that their two powers are kind of conflicting.
So while I do agree that the way they fuel those powers are conflicting, we do have situations of people that should be way more powerful being under the entity's control because they made some sort of deal, or because they were like at the end of their rope and they needed a way out, and that's when the fog rolled in and took them. Now, in the Lamb's case, what could end up happening is something similar to what happened with Nemesis, or what happened with the Knight or the Legion, where it wouldn't take just the Lamb. It would take the Lamb and 2 or 3 of his followers, so that the Lamb would still have some of his power in the entity's realm, but never enough that it would be able to overthrow the entity. And the entity would limit his connection with those followers to the best of its ability.
The only issue I have with that is I don't think that would be something that the Lamb would accept, because like the Lamb killed all of the other gods in the Lambs of the Old Faith. Like he slaughtered them all and took over, and he's the last god there. But also, this is another big one, the Lamb has the ability to freely travel between different universes and dimensions. So he is capable of traveling to Limbo. He's capable of traveling to the prison realm that Arinder is trapped in. Like, we see him travel to multiple universes. It's very possible that even if the fog does roll in and take the Lamb, he could just bail if he wants to.
You're saying it'd be more of a situation where, like, the Lamb would basically just overthrow the entity and say, "Fuck this shit, I'm out."
I think it's possible. Well, he may not care to overthrow the entity if he just wants to fucking get out. If he doesn't have any reason to be there. The Lamb was raised in the lands of the Old Faith. That's where he's from. So, like, there was nowhere in that game for him to go to bail. When he got his godlike powers, the first thing he said was, "I'm going to kill all these fucking dudes who like hunted my kind to extinction, tried to slaughter me." He had a reason to go after all of the gods in that world. If he's brought to the entity, I don't see him having much of a reason to be there unless the entity gives him a reason, which, I mean, I guess is possible. I suppose it would depend on exactly how the entity works. But then it's possible that he would just leave. He's a very, very ambitious and sadistic person, especially if you read the comics. Like, people say that he's actually not. You could play as a good guy. You can't play as a good guy.
No, you can't. Literally, the base thing in that game is brainwashing.
Yeah, like, you can choose to do the least amount of bad things, but you can't play as a good guy. No matter what, you indoctrinate people, and yeah, it's not good.
And feed them their own shit.
Yeah, but in the comics, they literally, like, for instance, doctrines. There are these things in the game called doctrines, where you have these basically stone tablets where you create rules for the followers to follow. In the comics, it is revealed that the doctrines don't just create rules, they actually dictate the followers' free will. The followers automatically believe whatever the doctrines are passed by the Lamb. He is literally controlling their free will. Now, they can become dissenters of the cult as a whole, and they can try to leave because you're not treating them well, they're starving.
Fed them too much shit.
Yeah, all kinds of crappy stuff, and they will leave, but the doctrines are actually revealed to control free will.
So unless you break out of the cult as a whole, the doctrine literally reshapes the way you think.
Yeah, yes. According to the comics, that's exactly what happens. In fact, in the comics, there's this one chick who, I don't think she's his wife, but she's like the follower that he's the closest to. She like begs him not to use them, and he does it anyway, and he controls all of the followers, and it's like this really, like, it's supposed to be this kind of like dark and sad thing where even his most loyal follower completely loses her free will to all of a sudden like have to do this. You know what I mean? Like, have to be, because he just strips them all. The idea that he's a good person is bullshit. It's not true at all.
Oh, but yeah, no, the Lamb is not good. So that actually brings up an interesting point. The entity has offered deals to beings of the Lamb's power before. So
it would depend if he could give him something that he wants. Because remember, where the Lamb is at the moment, he is the god of his realm. He's already killed all the other gods. It's literally just him now, and he is the god of death, and he rules over the lands of the Old Faith, basically with an iron fist at this point. The only people that he's killing now are like remnants of the Old Faith that are left, but they don't have anyone to serve.
I may have actually been better off bringing the goat than the lamb, because I know the goat is more of like a sadist and a torture.
He's more sadistic, that's true. The goat might actually be a better person. The lamb is kind of painted as wrathful towards the people who wronged him, that's true. And I guess you could say he's sadistic to them, but he's far more of a indifferent opportunist. He is indifferent to the suffering of others and an opportunist of like acquiring more power and more control. But the goat is actually legitimately described as a sadistic person who loves the suffering of other people. He would probably be cool with going there.
So
his power is still linked. I don't necessarily think that he would be okay with having his power limited by taking away his followers. Like, the entity would have to make it more viable for the goat to be there than to be in the lands of the Old Faith, where he already is capable of basically making people suffer like as much as he wants. Like, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if something very similar happens to what happened with Pinhead, where Pinhead shows up and starts taking people from the entity and bringing it to the labyrinth, which is the name of Pinhead's realm.
This is mine now.
Yeah, like, it's very possible the lamb and the goat, when they need people, instead of like going out into the lands of the Old Faith, they could be like, hey, let's just drop in this entity's realm real quick, grab some people and fucking dip. I know this guy who just like has a bunch of dudes there. Like, let's just, and they'll be like super, super happy that we got them out of there. They'll probably join the cult relatively easily.
So, I mean, maybe the cult would be very different to them, because it'd be a bunch of sentient animals controlling their free will compared to like the humans of the entity's realm that are the survivors. Like, you get humans like Bill Overbeck or Ash Williams from the Evil Dead franchise. Like,
yeah, but pretty much none of the survivors, Ash does, but pretty much none of the survivors are shown to have the ability to essentially counteract mind control in any way. Like, Ash is capable of kicking a demon. He can outdo possession, and he's been able to kick demons out of his body in the past. But nobody else in the roster has been able to do that. So I don't really see, if he does go over and take them and then bring them back to his cult, I don't really see them being able to undo the indoctrination, which is pretty strong. Like, it works on basically anyone, and it's damn near instant. So I think it could be viable.
Then maybe. I could 100% see, maybe not the lamb, but the goat probably making a deal with the entity where the entity wouldn't necessarily limit his power. With the beings that it made deals with, like, I believe Pinhead is actually one of them. When the Lament configuration showed up in the entity's realm and Dwight solved it, the entity said to the Cenobites when they showed up, look, I don't care if you want to take these people, but you need to give me at least something. That's why they have to go through the steps to actually get off their cutscene kill, which is called a Mori.
He's basically going to be like a Helob type character, because that's one thing I will give you. The lamb and the goat are both very open to making deals with other people. They don't just slaughter anybody. Like, Helob is useful to them because he sells them slaves that they then turn into followers, right? Midas is useful to him, despite the fact that Midas has actually robbed the lamb. And the lamb still doesn't just go over and instantly murder him, because Midas is useful to him.
Because I want to turn followers into gold, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there's more than that. He does more than that. But yeah, kind of. So basically, if the entity and the lamb and the goat can set up some sort of situation where they are both useful to one another, then I think that they can have an interesting working relationship. As weird as it sounds, they can have an interesting working relationship. But I don't know what the entity would be able to give the lamb, or what the lamb would be able to give the entity. The entity would want people, and the lamb would also want people. So, like, they both kind of want the same thing.
The entity doesn't necessarily want the people. So that's why I've kind of been distancing myself from the lamb as well, because, like, thinking about it, the goat would make a lot more sense in this scenario. Because the pleasure that the goat would derive from chasing people down, torturing them, impaling them, doing all of the sadistic stuff, all of that pleasure that the goat feels would feed the entity, as well as the fear of the survivors. So if at the end of it, the goat manages to get away with 2 or 3 people in one of the trials, oh well, the entity has made copies for that exact reason. All of the survivors can be replicated by the entity. It's each time the entity does that, they lose a little more of their humanity. It's like cloning a clone. Eventually, it will break down fully, and the entity won't be able to clone that person anymore. But if the goat wants to keep taking people, that's fine.
Yeah, the only issue that I could see with that is the goat can do all of the sadistic shit he wants in the land of the old faith. There's nothing that he's getting additionally in the entity's realm that he's not already. I mean, he is a god within that realm, like him and the lamb. I always forget about the goat because he was added later on. But the goat and the lamb are two gods that exist within this thing, and they have full reign. That already is their realm. I don't really see why.
Wouldn't he want to torture new people?
It's an entire island. We don't know how many people are on the island, but it's a whole population of people. The only thing I could see is maybe they could set up some kind of deal. Like, again, I don't know why they would do this, but maybe the goat or the lamb could give the entity people. He could torture, kill, and do all this awful things to people, and then when he loses interest in them because their emotions are all drained from them, they can then be given back to the lamb and the goat to be indoctrinated into the cult as basically mindless drones that will not dissent or anything because they literally have no reason to.
Well, that's kind of what I opened with, wasn't it? It's like I said that the lamb would basically act as kind of like a way to reset anybody who loses enough emotion back to zero. They become a mindless drone in the lamb's cult, but if they had enough willpower, they dissent, break out, and then their emotions would be reset.
Yeah, to me that seems like that might be the best case scenario, to be honest. I don't see, because I don't see them
just see the lamb just like either leaving and saying, nah, this is a joke, or getting into like a fight for territory with the entity.
Yeah, I don't see the lamb or the goat having a reason to stay in that realm. But having said that, no, I was going to say that there's really no reason for Pinhead to stay there either, but that's not true because Pinhead actually does steal people from it and bring it back. Something that the
Pinhead
lamb
also
really
needs the lament configuration, which is still stuck in the entity's realm as of now.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, that makes sense. All right.
Lament configuration, ever since Dwight solved it and the Cenobites arrived, the entity took it and hid it in a pocket of its own dimension. That's why Pinhead comes in and steals people from the entity. It's like, well, if I do this enough, you gonna give me the lament configuration?
Okay, that's basically where we're at with the lamb. That's kind of. Let's bring up the next character who is on my list, and I have the Antagonist from Hatred. So I think this one's gonna be pretty close. Have you ever played Hatred?
No.
Okay.
No.
It is a mass shooter simulator, basically. People really hated this game, and it started a lot of problems because you.
Yeah, no, I saw it on a list when I was actually making mine, because like I looked up a bunch of horror games and Hatred was on there. It was made by Rockstar, wasn't it?
No, basically what Hatred is you play this character known as the Antagonist, that's all he's called, and he absolutely despises everything. He despises society, he despises humanity, he despises life, he despises all of it, and he just wants to die. He wants to commit suicide. But before he dies, he wants to take as many people out with him as he can. So he gets a bunch of guns, and the game is just about you going down and mowing down a bunch of innocent people. You shoot civilians, the only thing you don't shoot is kids. You shoot civilians, you shoot cops, just not kids. And then the game eventually culminates into you going into a nuclear reactor and blowing it up, then destroying an entire city and killing millions.
Won't that kill the kids anyway?
Yeah, but I'm saying no kid. You can't kill kids in games generally. I think that's our actual rule. You're not allowed to do it, which is why they never let you do it.
It is. The ESRB has it as a rule. If you have any sort of like kids dying, it can't be by the main character's hand. Otherwise, the game is instantly 18 plus.
Which is crazy. You'd think that's so 1950s shit. You know, like all the way back. If you go like to there was a black and white movie a long time ago. I think it's called Seed of Evil. And in Seed of Evil, the end of the story was it's about a little girl who kills people basically, and it's called Seed of Evil because she inherited a seed of evil from her father, who was a serial killer, and she just goes around killing people. She kills the gardener. She kills like a ton of people. But basically, the end of it ends with her going off to a pier, and she gets hit by lightning and dies. It's one of the most like anticlimactic endings ever because she just dies by a bolt of lightning hitting her. It's just some tragic accident. Well, not tragic because she's a serial killer, but you know, a kid gets killed by lightning. And the reason why it happened is because back then they had a rule that you couldn't allow a murderer to get away with it in movies. If you allowed a murderer to get away with it, that was legal, so they didn't allow it. So that's not illegal, like what you're saying. That's just like, I don't know, it just seems like an odd limitation for where we are now. You can do so many fucked up shit in games, but it's like you just can't have like a kid die. You know?
Yeah, like in GTA 5, you can kidnap a hooker, beat her with a bat, and then send her on her way.
Yeah, you can do all kinds of fucked up shit. Like, we don't have like a rape simulator or anything, but there's a lot of fucked up shit that you could do in games. So it's just, it's kind of
on the Steam pages. Like, I guarantee you there is actually one of those somewhere.
A rape simulator? Yeah. Well, I guarantee you if there was, it would absolutely be 18 plus. But,
100%. But also, You might want to cut that out of the video. YouTube does not like that word.
That they'll get over it. Back to hatred. Physically, he's just like very strong. Like he can take bullets, he can take knives, he can take explosions, and he just kind of keeps coming at you. He's very, very hard to kill, and it's not until the end of the game that he blows himself up with a nuclear explosion. So if he goes to the entity's realm, he will be made into a killer because he hates all life and he wants to kill as many people as he wants, and he'll be very difficult to deal with simply because he's just very hard to deal with in himself, in his own world. The problem is that if he's, and this is what I thought would be interesting about bringing this character, and you tell me how this would go, he would absolutely despise the entity for bringing him into his realm because he wants to die. That's the whole goal throughout the game.
Oh, that's completely fine. The entity would feed off of that. We actually have characters like that in the realm already. One of them is actually the original character, the Trapper. So the Trapper was a boy who was tormented by his father because he was kind to the miners that worked for his father's company. Eventually, one day, his father told him, all right, you're going to go blow up that mine with all the miners in it because otherwise it's going to cost us way too much money. The boy didn't want to. His father beat him to within an inch of his life, and then he went and did it. That is exactly the point in his life that the entity came and took him from. Coming from one abusive master situation to another, with the entity being in complete control, telling him to go and kill a bunch of people even though he didn't want to because he was scared, and doing all of that, the Trapper rebelled and was tortured, which just fed the entity more. So in this situation, the antagonist, his hatred towards the entity would serve as additional fuel to feed the entity, and it would just make the entity want to keep him more and want to make him remember that he is in fact still alive and the entity's plaything, so he will never be allowed to die.
That's fine, but I don't think he's ever going to serve the entity the way the entity wants him to. I don't think at any point is he going to actually start feeding the entity of lives. He's just going to take them for himself.
Does the antagonist hate people?
He hates everything. He hates existence itself.
Okay, so he hates existence itself. So he would go around and try to kill the people in the trials.
Yes, but he would not give them... Well, I think he would not out of spite if the entity was keeping him alive. When he kills people in his own game, it's because what he really wants to do is die. He wants to commit suicide. But he also hates everything about life and people and all that. So he's like, if I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to take as many people out with me as I can. If the entity stops him from being able to kill himself, which was the whole purpose of the game, is to kill himself. I guess what I'm saying is his goal is not to kill people. His goal is to kill himself. Killing other people is just a bonus. If the entity is taking away the one thing that he wants, I don't see the antagonist giving the entity what he wants in return. And I don't necessarily think that any amount of torture would work given the type of character that he is. Like I said, he takes bullets and knives and all kinds of shit to his body constantly. He doesn't care. He already wants to die. Pain and suffering doesn't mean anything to him. He already kind of views life as a whole as suffering itself. So I just don't see the way you explain the Trapper. It sounds like he's like a sympathetic kind of character who was abused at first and is continuing to be abused by the entity. The antagonist is not some scared child that was abused. He is a vicious, he is hatred, and his whole goal is to spill his hatred across the world as much as he can before he goes out. So yes, I absolutely think that he would be spiteful against the entity and do the opposite of whatever the entity wants him to do. If the entity wants him to kill people for the good of the entity, he will take those kills away from him.
If he kills a survivor in the entity's realm, that kill is still feeding the entity.
That's what I was about to say. If killing the entity in any way would feed him, even if he doesn't offer it up, he just would not kill them. He would do whatever he can he wants to die. That's his goal. He will try to do anything he can to force the entity into letting him go and allowing him to die.
So in that situation, the entity might just make him a survivor, because the entity does have that ability. I understand from the way he is, he would likely have been a killer. If it would serve more to make him a survivor, where he is now subject to being chased and somebody will kill him, which will give him pleasure, which that pleasure would still feed the entity.
I don't think it's pleasure. It might bring him pleasure the first time, but being killed and constantly being brought back would not bring him pleasure. Like,
no,
I
would create more hatred, which that hatred would feed the entity.
I suppose he's already got hatred right out the gate, though. He's already pretty hateful. I guess. I mean, maybe something like that might happen where he's like trapped in an infinite loop. What I'm thinking is, I don't think them killing him is going to add to the hatred anymore. It would just be something that's just like, it's just he's in this now. Because he's not going to get fear from them. Them killing him he's not going to suffer from them killing him because he doesn't care about pain or suffering. None of that's going to affect him in any way. It's really just going to be the annoyance at the fact that he can't die, which he already is going to have the moment he gets there and realizes he can't die. I think it's going to be one of those, how did you just explain it earlier, negative returns. Where it's like at first that hatred will be at that point, but if he's there long enough, it's just going to be more frustration of him just being like, I can't die, and just kind of like I'm just waiting to die. Like it's like there's only so long that could last.
In that case, what may end up happening is that he would start as a killer when he stops listening, or even at the beginning, if like he doesn't listen and doesn't do what he's told.
Basically immediately, yeah.
He'd become a survivor, and then once the entity sees no more use for him as a survivor because like he's just apathetic to everything because he just wants to die,
he already is just kind of. Like I think that's going to happen very, very fast.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it would last a long time, but what would probably end up happening at the end of that is he would be fed to one of the several people that just feed on the entire soul of a being in the entity's realm. So like he'd probably be given to Dredge or even the Cenobites, or like somebody else would take him off the entity's hands.
Yeah, he would be happy with that, I think. As long as he's actually dead. Like, I don't even necessarily think that
in terms of, like, becoming part of Dredge, he would just become, like, it would just be nothingness.
Yeah, that's kind of what he wants.
Like, so the entity would get, like, one last burst of happiness and satisfaction from him, and that would be that.
I think he would make a very interesting Cenobite. I know this is kind of outside of Dead by Daylight, but I think the idea that a Cenobite becomes a Cenobite when you make someone feel so much suffering that pleasure and pain become one and the same. Like, you have to learn to love suffering. And while I don't necessarily think that the antagonist gets pleasure from suffering, he's completely apathetic to it. I think he's closer to that than most people are, So I actually think that hatred would be a very interesting Cenobite if he gave him up to.
It would certainly be an interesting one to see, like, Pinhead taking hatred into the labyrinth and seeing if hatred came back out as Cenobite.
I think he would be super annoyed with hatred. They call him the antagonist, but I think he would be very annoyed with the antagonist because the whole idea is Pinhead loves suffering from people, and I don't think the antagonist is going to suffer there. I think he's going to be completely indifferent to all of the torture that's done to him, and it would frustrate the shit out of Pinhead. He would just be so annoyed that he just doesn't care about it. It would almost be like if he was going to torture Deadpool. You know what I mean? It's like
where Deadpool just kind of gets off on it.
Yeah, well, he's not getting off. He wouldn't be getting off on it. He's just not affected by pain in the same way that a normal person would be. Either Pinhead would be frustrated, or Pinhead would get to the point where he sees him as like the ultimate challenge for him. Like, if I make you feel suffering, I know that I am doing my shit. But I do think that there's a limit. There is a maximum amount of pain that someone can feel, and I'm pretty sure Pinhead can make someone feel that maximum amount. And if the antagonist doesn't care about that maximum amount, then it's just, there's nothing that even Pinhead can do. I think he would almost be booted. Like, he's a character that would, this is actually kind of funny. He's a character that's not useful to the entity. He's not useful to Pinhead. If you don't destroy his soul with the Droog, I think he would honestly, or Dredge, sorry. Droog is from Clockwork Orange. But if his soul doesn't get destroyed with Dredge, I think that's the best outcome for him, is for his soul to be destroyed with Dredge. But if his soul doesn't get destroyed with Dredge, and the entity can't use him, and Pinhead can't use him, and he's just like tossed out back into life, that would be the most annoying shit that could possibly. Like, he was kicked out of 2 hells because he's just like not wanted. It's like, god damn it, they're really.
It's like the entity gives him to the Cenobites. The Cenobites say, "Fuck this." What if Pyramid Head got his hands on him? Because Pyramid Head, as we actually talked about before recording this, in his like newer versions, he's judge, jury, and executioner for anybody who feels any sort of like guilt or.
No, he wouldn't do anything. Antagonist doesn't feel guilt.
So he'd be kicked out of 3 different hells.
Well, that's not a hell. Silent Hill's not a hell. I guess you could argue it's like an alternate dimension, but it's definitely not hell exactly. But yeah, he would be thrown out of 3 different.
Basically, he'd be thrown out of 3 different.
Well, okay, not really. There is no great overall leader of Silent Hill that could just boot people from the universe. But I do think that a lot of the stuff that happens in Silent Hill, if he was in Silent Hill, again, he would just want them to kill him. Well, people can die in Silent Hill, so he would just want to die in Silent Hill. I mean, I don't think much would change. He wouldn't get booted out. He would just really want Pinhead to kill him. That's kind of
Pyramid.
That's kind of what he would just like, Pyramid Head, like, kill me, please. Like, I'm so sick of this shit. Get me out of there. Like that's
So
just
basically, he gets kicked out of one hell, kicked out of another, and then Pyramid Head is just like, finally put me out of my misery.
Yeah, please do it. I'm so sick of this shit. I think eventually
Yeah,
he's gonna get so fed up. that
He
he'll
probably
shoot
just end up being fed to something like Dredge, where they just don't want to deal with him anymore. So he's either cast into the abyss of nothingness, where the entity banished the blight for a long time, or he'd just be like fed to Dredge or the unknown.
I think that's the best outcome for him. I think the funniest ending that a Hatred could possibly have is if he went, because at the end of the game he nukes himself, kills kills everyone in the city. If he went to hell,
so got
he, like,
pulled
woke
out
up
just before he got nuked by the entity, ends up in the entity's
he
realm.
would be so annoyed. He would be so annoyed. Oh my god, would he be annoyed? But like, let's say he goes to hell, right? Let's say the nuke does hit him and he goes to hell. I think that the Antagonist is the type of character that would be so annoyed by the fact that there is an afterlife that he would just be like, okay, so I have to do this forever? Like, he would be so frustrated that there isn't. Like, he wants there to be nothingness after death. And the fact that all of these different dark god-like beings keep pulling him into all of these different afterlives, he would be just so frustrated.
So pissed off.
He would be so mad. He would be so mad. I almost see it like...
It would be really funny, like, just before the nuke goes off, the entity takes him. Now, he's not doing anything for the entity, so the entity passes him on to the Cenobites. Pinhead just gets so fucking annoyed with this guy because this guy's not showing anything that he just boots him back out to life after the nuclear explosion.
That would be so funny. It's like the weirdest game of musical chairs, but with hells. I like this one. I'm glad I wasn't sure if this character would actually do a whole lot, because of the fact that he doesn't have like
in terms of his interaction with like the entity's realm, he wouldn't do much because
he doesn't have the power to do anything.
Like, he wouldn't be able to fight the entity to like gain his own freedom, but he wouldn't serve the entity enough to be worth the entity's problem, so he'd probably just pawn it off on someone else or throw him into an abyss where he'd be happy anyway.
Yeah, the fact that he wants to die and he's not scared of anything, and you can't really threaten him in any way with torture or death, makes this a very funny character to put in this situation. Because it's like, no one knows what to do with him, and he's just like wants this one thing that he's just not getting. It's very fun. So I think we're pretty much done with Hatred. Moving on, the next character on the list is the Doom Demons. But specifically, I want to kind of change this up. I don't want to just bring the Doom Demons in there and invade the entity's realm. That's kind of boring.
That also doesn't really fit the spirit of this.
Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But what I am doing is, at the end of Doom Eternal, The Ancient Gods Part 2, Davith is dead, which means the corruption should more or less be gone. And if it's not gone, it's very subtle based on individual demons. You also have the fact that Davith made a deal where the demons are no longer allowed to leave hell. So I think it could be interesting if the entity pulls in one demon, just one, to be a killer in his realm, and what might happen from that one demon being there. So like if he pulled out a Baron of Hell or a Marauder or something like that, maybe Erebus, that would be interesting, into his realm to just kind of see like what would it, just one demon. Because then what you would end up having is basically like the personality of demons are a lot like orcs. Their entire civilization is built on strength and the strongest being in control. And then you have like this weird magical heat demon that has this corruption that is going to slowly start infecting not only the survivors, but possibly the other killers as well as possibly the entity itself if it's left there long enough. Like, it's not the Icon of Sin. The Icon of Sin's corruption is so strong that it was able to corrupt an entire universe immediately once it woke up. But just taking like a Baron of Hell is not going to be that strong of a corruption, but it will be a subtle corruption over a long period of time. And I'm just curious what you think would happen if a single demon was pulled in as a killer into this universe.
Okay, so this would be very similar to something that we've already seen with the Blight. So the Blight is a killer in Dead by Daylight that was an original creation. Basically, the entity was so scared of the Blight because of what it represented and what it could do to the entity that it banished it to the abyss of nothing, where it thought no one would ever find it. No one would ever be able to do anything with it. Eventually, the entity got a doctor of some sort that came in. I'm not super familiar with his lore, but he was banished to the Abyss as well. And while there, he found these blight flowers and created a serum that he then started injecting into himself because it gave him enhanced abilities. He then became so dependent on the serum that he started mutating and became just a walking bag of this blight. And from there, he managed to break out of that abyss of nothingness where nothing should be able to break out from, and went on to infect not only the other killers, but the entity itself and the trial grounds that the survivors all run around in. And this was a huge thing. I feel like it would be a very similar situation to that, where like the entity would try to contain it as best it could with the demon. Once it realized what was happening with the corruption, it would try to contain it by throwing it into another abyss very similar to what happened with the blight. But eventually that corruption would probably seep through, because these are beings that don't die of like age or disease, right?
No, they're immortal. They can't get sick. They don't feel any negative emotions or get really anything negative that humans would get. So yeah, that's what but also, is the blight like a plague or a disease that spreads in that way? Like, how does the blight, what is the blight?
It started as like a serum extracted from a certain flower. But then when the blight, the killer, ended up breaking free of his confinement, it started spreading more like a disease, and it started infecting. It blighted creatures like Nemesis. It blighted the trial grounds. It even managed to blight a horse that is just a creation of the entities.
See, I don't think that this, because of that, I don't think that these are the same things. For one, it being a sickness, sicknesses are a lot more obvious than the corruption is, at least at first. The corruption is just sort of, it's not something you can measure, it's not something you can feel or touch or see. It's just sort of, it just sort of is. It's just the rage of Davith. Now that Davith's dead, he's not spreading it. The demons all spread it individually as creations of Davith. So him just being there, I don't think that the entity or really anyone would even be aware that the corruption is affecting them in any way until it starts to get too obvious. And by that point, I think you're probably looking at something that's too late. I almost feel like it's gonna be sort of a situation where it's like you start to see a spread of some sort of sickness through your arm, so you cut your arm off in order to not allow it to spread farther. Like, I think by the time the entity even notices that a corruption is happening, all of his survivors are gonna be corrupted, and a good portion of his killers will likely also be corrupted or on the way to be corrupted, to the extent that he might just have to like reset and just get rid of everyone and bring in all new people, including the demon.
There are definitely a lot of killers that would be easily corrupted because it's based on like the rage you carry with you, right?
No, certain characters are more resistant than others. We don't really know what makes them resistant. Like, we know that Doom Guy is completely incorruptible. That's because he's primeval. But like, we know that the Betrayer is also very highly resistant, because I guess the corruption would really just work based on how easily you would be corrupted, like in actual real life, right? How much money, how much things that you desire would I have to give you in order for you to go against your principles? I suppose that would be the main factor, because like the Betrayer has survived so long in hell because he hates the demons. He like already gave up, like went against his principles when he wanted his son to come back to life, and his son was turned into an icon of sin. So he like fucking despises the demons. I don't know if he can never be corrupted at this point, but it's been a long time and he hasn't been corrupted. So it seems like he may have a very high resistance due to his just general hatred towards the demons and the fact that he will never serve them kind of situation. So it probably has something to do with that. But if all of these people, like people who are easily going to be corrupted, like the Scream character is going to very easily be corrupted. Like, I think certain characters are going to be corrupted damn near immediately.
There are tons of killers who are just searching for more power. The Oni, the Hag, all of those would be super easily corrupted. So if what you're saying is true, what would probably end up happening is that the entity would cast them all out of its realm, or, and probably better, it would give them all to Dredge, and Dredge would just consume.
I mean, would Dredge be able to beat them all? There does seem to be a power structure going on between certain characters being stronger than other characters, but if you start corrupting all of the killers, and remember, when a being gets corrupted by the demons, they become more powerful than they were before, significantly so.
When a creature gets blighted, it becomes more powerful than it was. All of its abilities are enhanced.
Sure, but is it to the same extent?
Can't say.
In Doom 2016, they had a crippled woman get corrupted, and she turned into the Spider Mastermind, which became the last boss of the entire game.
Which, by the way, that was a fucking awesome boss to fight.
It's a cool boss. Yeah. But no, the boss fights in Doom are done really, really well. They're all very enjoyable. Actually, my least favorite boss is Davith. Is my least favorite boss. And my second least favorite boss
is the human.
Icon of Sin. No, I think that mechanically he was done very poorly. They took all of the good things about the Marauder and they made them bad for the Davith boss fight. But I also don't really like the Icon of Sin fight all that much. But like the fights where it's just you slugging it out with someone else, like the Cyber Demon fight, the Gladiator fight, like those are all really good boss fights. Those are really, really fun. But what were we saying? What we were talking about the fucking...
We were talking about how the Blight also enhances the same way the Corruption does. I can't say if it's to the same extent or not. What I can say is that the Blight did enhance the abilities of all the killers. It made them far more terrifying while it was prevalent. The entity did eventually manage to get it back under control.
I just feel like, is a blighted Pinhead more dangerous than a demonic Pinhead? A demonic Pinhead would basically become a demon lord.
Well, Pinhead's already a demon.
No. Pinhead is not a demon.
No, Pinhead's a Cenobite, which the Cenobites operate in a realm that's very similar to what would be the Hell from Doom.
No. When people die, they do not go to... Well, technically, Doom's Hell isn't Hell either. Like, when you die and you're a bad person, you don't go to Doom's Hell. Doom's Hell is just another universe. So in that way, it actually is similar to the Cenobites. The Cenobites are just alternate dimension beings, and the Labyrinth is just another realm that this cosmic god rules over. It's in no way tied to heaven or hell. Pinhead does directly state that some people consider them demons and some people consider them angels, but the concept of angels and demons do not exist in the Hellraiser movies, at least. Maybe they bring them up in the comics at some point if there's like a crossover or something I don't know about. Because I know they have crossovers with other fictional universes, but yeah, it's just an alternate universe. It's not
Dead by Daylight.
Yeah, basically, it's essentially exactly like Dead by Daylight and kind of like Doom, but they're not. None of those three locations are actually hell, the way a biblical hell would be seen. In Doom, hell is actually a alternate universe known as Jakad, and the demons are just beings that have been corrupted by a cosmic god's anger. They're basically just interdimensional conquerors that jump into other worlds, steal souls, and bring them back. But like I said, there's no devil. If a character dies, their soul doesn't automatically go to hell if they're bad people. It's not the biblical hell. It's just an alternate dimension of alien conquerors, basically. That's just sort of very... Yeah, that's just sort of very hell themed. So yeah, in that way, Jakad, the Labyrinth, and the Entity's Realm are all basically similar ideas, because none of them are truly hell. But yeah, I think that a Pinhead demon that is corrupted into a demon would be super fascinating. It would easily become a demon lord, I think. I don't even think that's debatable. Like, he would be a really cool character in that case. I actually think the coolest thing about this is seeing the different killers and what their demonic versions would look like, and like what their whole deal would be, because they would get a whole new slew of powers. They'd have to get all new designs.
They'd all get the same treatment that they did when the Blight happened. It might end up just being a case of like the entity may just let it happen as long as it doesn't interfere with the emotions that the entity needs. And as soon as that starts, the entity would look for a way to stop the corruption. Either stop it and just like let the cosmetics stay the same if he can't revert them.
It would change everything that the realm is, because the survivors would get corrupted, the killers would get corrupted, the environment itself would start to get corrupted, the entity itself would start to get corrupted.
So the only way for the environments to be corrupted would be if the entity is corrupted. The environments are essentially the skin of the entity.
I don't see a reason as to why the entity would not be corrupted, given that Davith's anger was able to corrupt all of the other gods in the multiverse.
But that's specifically Davith's anger. Davith is dead. The demon does not contain the same level of anger.
Yes, Davith is dead. Well, it's not anger. Anger is not necessary for this. You keep saying anger. That doesn't matter.
You're the one who said Davith's anger.
Well, no, Davith's anger does. I'm saying the demon's anger is not... The Davith's anger created the corruption. That was the birth of it. But the corruption itself is not reliant on the anger of the demon. It just was created via Davith's. Davith is so powerful and over the top and all this kind of stuff that simply his anger invented this force in the multiverse. But it is not anger itself. Demons' sheer existence just spread it. They don't have to be angry about anything. But I don't think that the demon will be able to quickly corrupt the entity. But I don't necessarily think if the entity hasn't shown any resistance to something like this, it can happen to him. I don't think, let's say this, it's going to take a lot longer, but I think he will still eventually start to feel the effects of the corruption. It's also possible that once other demons start getting corrupted, they will also start to spread the corruption, which will make the corruption stronger. It's also possible that eventually they may actually be able to start opening up portals from hell, and then you're basically just looking at a Doom invasion again, which I'm trying to stay away from just talking about a straight up invasion of the realm, because I think we know how
straight up
that'll
invasion of the realm, Doom wins. There's no debate on that.
No, I was trying to keep this as much as possible to just one demon staying in. But the fact is that if you put one demon in, it's going to create more demons simply due to the fact that the other people get corrupted into demons.
With the one demon being there, we have seen the entity be infected and overcome it. It managed to suppress the blight, and now the blight is only something that comes out when people play blighted skins.
But the blight isn't the same thing as the Doom demonic corruption. That's the problem. The Doom demonic corruption is described as being inevitable and unstoppable, and it affects the body, mind, and soul of the thing it corrupts. There's no evidence, as far as you've told me so far, that the blight affects the soul and can affect concepts and can affect gravity and the environment.
Considering the fact that some of the killers are literally spirits and ghosts, the blight can 100% affect souls.
That doesn't mean that they're affecting souls, because even the ghosts, they're all physical. All of them are physical. All of the killers.
Where are you getting that?
The fact that they can physically interact with people.
They can physically interact with people in the entity's realm because of the entity's design. They are not physical beings.
You can't phase through objects and shit when you're the Wraith. You have to
climb.
You can. When you're playing as the Wraith, you have to climb through the windows and shit. You don't just phase through shit. You can't just phase through the pallets that the people knock in your way. It's not like you just walk through them and you can ignore them.
No, because that's not the Wraith's ability. There are a lot of killers that don't physically interact with the world. They use telekinesis, like the nurse, or they're able to just straight up teleport.
Teleporting doesn't mean you're not physical. That's teleport. I'm saying,
well, Dredge is physical, but
if the pallets work on every killer, which as far as I'm aware they do, then you can't say that any of them aren't physical beings. They are physical. They do have
the pallets only work because, again, it's by the entity's design. The pallets have to work to give the survivors the idea that they are able to survive.
But then the ghosts are still given a physical form. Whether you want to say it's by the entity's design or not, they're still physical in this realm. So it makes sense the blight would affect them.
No, because technically none of this realm is physical. There is an argument to be made that the entire realm is spiritual and only the entity. So the entire realm could be soul.
Well, if we're doing that, then that's, in that case, if that is true, then the blight isn't a physical thing. It's only a spiritual thing, in which case the corruption is still more powerful. It affects body, mind, soul. That's one thing, but it also affects literal reality itself. It affects gravity. It affects physical things like concrete and walls. It affects physics. It actually changes everything about the universe. I don't see how these two things are comparable, even if the realm isn't physical. You would have to explain to me what makes the blight and the corruption in any way comparable, because right now it just seems like it has small similarities, I suppose, by the fact they're both some kind of infection-like things, even though the corruption's not an infection, but that seems to be about it. And I guess the fact that they both give the infected power-ups.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that, because I know Doom lore doesn't really fit in anything except Doom lore, because it was literally throw the most awesome shit at the wall and see what sticks. It's a third grader running around on the playground saying my force field's more powerful than yours. There's no real way to win against Doom unless it's Doom. In this situation, there's no real way for the entity to have any sort of control here, because Doom wins.
I don't think, well, I'm not saying that the entity can't do anything. I think the entity needs to get rid of the demon. I think it needs to get rid of the demon, it needs to kill the demon, it needs to send the demon away. I don't think it should keep the demon there. I don't know what the entity can do. See, that's my issue. Is it possible that the entity could put a weakening thing on the demon and somehow remove its ability to use corruption in the first place? I don't know. I don't know what the entity can do.
Well, the entity can 100% limit the demon's power. Removing its ability to corrupt, it may modify it the same way it did with Freddy Krueger's dream ability, where it modified his abilities to infiltrate the dreams in order to make it fit the trials. So it may modify the corruption so that the corruption can only impact in one trial at a time. We have seen that level of prowess with the entity's power, but in terms of control over a demon from Doom, I'm not sure, because again, the demons from Doom are kind of just on another level of power. The only reason that Doom Guy can even kill them is because he is literally the only force in the universe that is able to consistently go and kill them.
To be fair, and I think this is an important thing to bring up, we don't actually know if the demons are still capable of corrupting. Like, I'm assuming that they're still capable of corrupting because the demons can corrupt individually, but with David dead, did that just completely eliminate the existence of the corruption? That is possible. Like, the last thing that happened in the game is David died, so we don't have confirmation on what happened to the corruption.
So really leave this as like the demon would be a really cool killer and would possibly corrupt the entity if that is something it can do, but we can revisit this when the new game comes out.
Oh, also, one more thing that we should probably talk about is the fact that the demons are also capable of adapting. The reason why you have Barons of Hell and Fireborn Barons is because the Fireborn Barons are in a section of Hell that's even hotter than the regular. And then you have the Curse Prowlers that are from a group of demons that practice curse magic, and they practice it for generations, and eventually the demons just started getting born with cursed magic in their body inherently. So they actually do adapt, and a single demon can actually adapt all sorts of abilities over its lifetime and continuously adapt to different things. So it's possible that whatever demon we throw in there, like if we throw a Baron of Hell in there, it may have a totally different set of powers 100 years later, or like however long it's in there, which could be
that would be a really interesting concept for a DBD killer. Just one that changes its entire build anytime there's a major update.
That would be interesting, but I don't think they would want to do that.
I don't think they'd want to do that either, because like as a live service game, they need people to be able to keep coming back and play like the characters that they love.
Yeah, I think that would also be very frustrating for the player base. Maybe if you were going to do something like that,
constantly learn the demon over.
Yeah, well, not only do you have to constantly play, like maybe that might be your favorite dude, and then all of a sudden they update it. Now you like it's nothing like it was before. Like, oh well, I don't want to play with this character anymore. That's one of the reasons why I fell off. I was never huge on Overwatch, but one of the reasons I fell off of Overwatch is because they kept fucking nerfing all the characters that I like. And it's like, well, it's annoying. Stop changing all the characters, and I had to keep swapping over and over again. I'm like, I just want to get comfortable with a set of characters.
I mean, I 100% understand that, because like I mained Reaper, and then 3 months later I came back and Reaper was like 10 times different, and I'm like, the fuck is this? This guy
Reaper
shotguns have no weight anymore. I'm basically shooting rubber bullets. Like my ult is not worth a damn anymore. Like it's just
They even updated like how he healed. Like he used to heal with each shot, and then he healed by killing people. They dropped little orbs, and then I think they changed it like 2 more times. Like they constantly change it. And then Roadhog, they nerfed him to the point that he was basically useless. Like, he was a little broken at first. Basically, if you chained and brought them closer,
nerf him into the ground.
Oh, it was to the point where it was like he's barely even worth playing. So yeah, it was bad. But
I remember the days where he was broken, but he did not need to be nerfed into the ground.
Yeah, one thing I can see them doing, where they have one character where they release like the demon, not constantly update him and make him different, but as you play an individual match, that character will alter throughout the match. Like, the character is stronger towards the end of the match than he is at the beginning of the match. You know what I mean? I don't know how they would incorporate it, but basically, like, if the killer is doing really poorly, maybe that particular killer will get certain buffs or enhancements to make it easier on him to kill them late game. But if he's doing really well and he's like killing all of them really fast, it's like he doesn't get
like, you don't get that buffs. Yeah. So yeah, like, it would be a situation of like, if the survivors manage to fix 4 of the generators before like you even manage to catch one, you move faster and you can break pallets faster.
Yeah, like maybe make the character suck at the start and then make him really fucking good by the end. Where it's almost like that final push is way more intense for the survivors than it is for any other killer, because now you're dealing with like the most powerful killer, but like the first, who knows how many minutes of the game, you were kind of breathing.
This is like a super easy game up until like the midpoint where like they start being like a normal killer.
Yeah, and then that final push where the hatch,
it's like, you really gotta run.
Yeah, and then that final push where the hatchet opens and it's like, okay, there's only like 1 dude left, like we gotta get out of here. And it's like, oh shit, it's just me and this one dude, and he's like 3 times stronger than all of the other killers combined. It's like, oh shit. And it's like, that could be kind of like a fun sort of like, almost like a meta game.
I feel like that would be a really interesting character to play, because I feel like with enough skill, you'd be able to manipulate the game to such an extent, because as it stands, the game is very survivor focused, because the survivors set the pace of the game. So with any of like the killers, they need to walk around and find the survivors, which is really hard to do if the survivors aren't doing objectives. So you can keep a game going for 40 minutes if everybody's just running around hiding, playing Ring Around the Rosie. As soon as the survivors start doing the generators and start going for objectives, that's when the real game starts. With a killer, that kind of flips that entirely on its head of like, you are now doing objectives, this guy is getting stronger. It gives a little bit of that power back to the killer and makes the game feel more intense again. I think that'd be a really interesting thing.
Yeah, it would be. It would be very difficult to do it in a way that didn't like break the game though.
It would take a lot of playtesting for sure.
Yeah, a ton. You don't want to make them so weak at the beginning that you can't do anything. You don't want to make them so powerful at the end that it doesn't matter
like,
that he was weak for the rest of it. It's like, yeah, it's like this is ridiculous.
Like you need to find like that perfect sweet spot, which would be really hard to find and would take a lot of playtesting, but it would be a really good character if done right.
Yeah, it's never gonna happen. They're never gonna do that. It would be cool. It would be cool.
Too much work. Way too much work.
Yeah, no, they're not doing that. But yeah, so that I think we're done with the Doom. Let's move on to the next one. This one's going to annoy people. I know it is, because I have Archangel Michael from Judeo-Christian religions. Yeah, people are going to be really mad about this one.
The fucking juxtaposition. You saying people are going to be really upset, me laughing my fucking ass off over here.
No, well, last time I talked about anything biblical in one of my videos, a lot of people got upset the fact that I even used anything biblical, because, you know, that's truth, and you're using it along the lines of, you know, fiction, so you're inherently saying that it's fictional. I'm just going to be out in the open. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in it.
It is,
but I'm also not saying it's
Judeo-Christian mythology. It is still a mythology.
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not saying that it's fictional or not. I mean, I've had Hitler on these lists too. Just because they're on these lists doesn't mean that it's fictional. But what I am talking about today, absolutely, I think most people would consider is Judeo-Christian mythology, because I think a lot of people are not going to agree with a lot of the stuff that I say. So I really like religion and mythologies just in general, and because if you look back into the history of religion and mythologies, like all the way back, it's kind of the first, not cinematic universe, but it's sort of the first cinematic universe that wasn't cinematic is religion. There are stories about Jesus and Archangel Michael and all these characters in like Greek mythology and Canaanite religions and Babylonian religions, and they all exist. So when you go back and you look at all of these different religions, you get a really interesting story about what these characters went through since like before Christianity even existed. And it's really, really fascinating to talk about. So
not only what they went through, but like what they are to the different people who wrote their stories. Because to the Greeks, Jesus was nowhere near a prophet, but to the Canaanites and the Babylonians, Jesus was a figure to be revered.
I'm not talking about the historical aspects, right? No one who has a brain is going to argue that Jesus wasn't real. The argument is, was he the son of God? That's the argument people have. Not that if you say he's not real, you just don't know history.
No, Jesus of Nazareth was 100% a real person.
Yeah, he's actually a real person. I've had people argue with me. There's like, well, you believe that he's real, you know? It's like, I don't believe that he's real.
No, it's not a belief. He is a real person. Jesus of Nazareth existed. He was born in Jerusalem.
There's as much evidence that he exists as there is Julius Caesar. Like, he's absolutely real. But that's not the point. The point that I'm making is, for instance, in the story in, I believe it's Revelations, I might be wrong about that. There's a story where after the crucifixion, Jesus jumps down into hell, and there is a quote in the Bible that says that he conquered death and hell. Now, this is interesting because death is capitalized, implying that it's a name. You don't really think that hard about this story until you understand that it was originally written in Greek. And the words for death and hell didn't exist in Greek. And the word for death as a name is Thanatos. So if you look at it in that particular way, you see that the story in Greek, which again is where it was originally written, is that Jesus went down into hell or into Hades, because that was the hell of Greek, and conquered Hades, the god of the underworld, and Thanatos, the god of death. That is a crossover that Christianity had with Greek mythology. And a lot of people get really mad at me when I talk about this, because that is the original story. When Christian stories were originally written, they did the smart thing. They didn't write their stories in a way where it completely said that all of these other mythologies are false. They didn't do that. If it did that, no one would actually swap over to Christianity. What they did was they wrote their stories in a way that made it be like, no, you haven't been wrong this whole time. Our way of thinking and our way of believing is just better. So like, come with ours. Like, our God kicked your God's ass, so come on over here. So in the original story, Jesus goes down to Hades and he conquers the god of the underworld, Hades, and he conquers Thanatos, death, the name, which also, by the way, heavily implies that the death of the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Christianity is actually Thanatos, the Greek god of death. When you actually start looking at how these stories evolved over time, it is infinitely fascinating.
It's also the four horsemen, war, pestilence, death, and famine, are heavily implied to also be Greek gods. The horseman of war is Ares.
Yeah, the thing that people get mad about is the fact that I'm saying that like other gods exist in Christianity. It says that other gods exist, and people are like, no, there is only one God. Christians say that, sure. The Bible at no point says that there is only one God. In fact, the Bible implies very strongly that there are other gods. It just tells you not to worship them. I mean, it's literally a line in the Bible, there shall be no other gods before me. That doesn't mean that there are no gods other than him. That just means don't worship them. The Bible itself actually has references to characters like Zeus and things like this. They don't say them by name, but they very, very heavily imply their existence. And most of these gods that appear in the Bible appear as demons. So, like, for instance, there's a story in the Bible about a Babylonian king.
This is a cutaway, guys. I'm sorry about this. I don't normally do this. I generally just like the conversation to play out, and whatever me and Dan or whoever I'm talking to says, that just stays in. But I was very vague in this section about what exactly I was talking about. And that's because in the moment I couldn't think of certain details like the name of locations and the name of the myth that I'm talking about or the name of the characters within the myth. So I just want to kind of clarify here, and then we'll continue on with the video. Basically what I'm referring to here is a book in the Bible that's found in Isaiah, which I'm going to flash on screen, that talks about someone who was casted down from heaven and then decided to take over the throne of Babylon and pretend to be immortal, conquering nations and all this different kind of stuff. This story mimics directly a story that is found in Canaanite mythology about a god named Hallel who is also Venus. Canaanite myth is pretty crazy. Who is casted down from the realm of the gods, takes over the throne of Babylon that is a mortal throne. God's not supposed to do that. And then decides to use it to start conquering countries so that he can gain enough power to overthrow El, who is a higher god, so that Hallel can claim his seat back as a god, the throne that he lost. This Bible verse talks about a throne on a northern mountain where the gods assemble. Not only is this phrase yet another instance of the Bible referring to multiple gods and not just Yahweh, further proving that people say that the Bible says there's only one God is false, but also the throne on a northern mountain where the gods assemble very clearly refers to the Canaanite story that I'm talking about, where El, the god of gods in Canaanite mythology, lives on a northern mountain, and that is the place where the gods assemble. It's very similar to like Olympus in Greek mythology. There is no questioning whatsoever if you read this and then go and read the Canaanite myth. The Bible is referring to that specific story and that specific mythology. Now, in the original book of Isaiah, which the original translation was Hebrew, they actually used the word Hallel to describe this character, this guy who sat on the Babylonian throne. Hallel in Hebrew means the shining one, and if you read this book in any modern Bible, they changed the shining one to bright morning star. I generally hate the phrase morning star when it's used in the Bible because it's almost always used as changing whatever the original descriptor is. They really like throwing morning star in there. In case you're not aware, the name Lucifer means morning star, who, by the way, Lucifer is not actually in the Bible, at least not in any translation I've ever read, because he doesn't originate from the Bible. He actually originates from a story known as Paradise Lost that was written in the 1700s, and he's a totally not biblical character whatsoever. But because so many people kind of come to the idea that Lucifer is the morning star star, and they're the same thing. They just assume that every time morning star is used in the Bible, they are actually referring to the devil. This isn't true at all. In fact, even Mary, Jesus' mother, was referred to as the morning star at one point. Morning star is just kind of a placeholder descriptor that is used in the Bible, but originally this descriptor was the shining one because in this Isaiah story, it was Hallel. In the original Canaanite myth, Hallel is eventually dethroned and cast down into like this realm where tortured gods go by a star, and it's never actually explained who that star is, just kind of slightly implied to be different gods. Whereas in the Bible, this story has Yahweh, the God of Christianity, come down and cast this person into hell. So in this Christian story, if it were to be read in Hebrew, would be about the Canaanite god Hallel and his story, basically the planet Venus coming down, taking over Babylon, taking it from mortals, conquering a bunch of people, and trying to overthrow El before the Christian god comes down and says, you guys can't do that shit anymore, and boots his ass down to hell. Then making Hallel a demon in the Christian religion. Now, because you can find little stuff like this all across the Bible where there are stories that came from other mythologies, people like to say that Christianity is a borrowed religion. I don't agree with this at all. It is not a borrowed religion, because the people who wrote these books at the time were not plagiarizing these stories. They were literally adapting them. Hallel was in the story. There was no sneaky hiding going on where they were just stealing the story and altering it to make it seem like it was their own thing. They were taking all of these different stories from these other religions and fitting it in with their own as to convince people who are from these religions to more easily come into Christianity. If you read this Isaiah story today without that context and you know of the Canaanite myth, it does seem like plagiarism because they've removed every single reference to the Canaanite story as to, I guess, make the story seem more legitimate because it's not based on a myth, but originally it was that myth. So, just stop changing the stories. Also, the story of the planet Venus coming down and stealing a throne to try and overthrow this other god before Yahweh shows up and says, no, stop doing that, and boots both of their asses to hell, is so much more interesting than just some dude somewhere on the throne that wasn't supposed to be there that may or may not be the devil. That's boring. It also seems to like streamline the Bible stories, where it used to be all of these stories were about a bunch of different characters from all sorts of different myths, and it was really cool. And now it's like every fucking story is about the devil, but not necessarily about the devil, because there's no evidence in the Bible that the devil, Satan, the great dragon, and all of these other characters are even all the devil. Like, there's no connective tissue saying that Satan and the devil are the same person. And the reason why there's no connective tissue is because in these stories originally, most of these characters weren't the devil. They were totally different characters that were then changed to the devil because more modern translators didn't want to utilize anything from the myths anymore. It's irritating. Stop doing it. These stories were cooler back then. Anyway, rant over. Sorry, back to the video.
There's also, for instance, Beelzebub is a demon in not the Bible. I think he's not in the Bible anymore, but I believe he's still in Torah, and I also believe he might be in the Quran still. I could be wrong. But
he's still in Judeo-Myth, but he's not so much in the Christian.
I don't think he's in the Bible. But Beelzebub is a demon, but he's like the Lord of Flies. But originally, he was a god known as Beelzebub, which doesn't mean Lord of Flies. Beelzebub is what Christians call him, and he was like the main god of, I'm forgetting what religion. I'm good. It's late. I'm getting all my fucking religions messed up. But yeah, basically the Christians took the gods of all of these other religions and kept their stories as those religions viewed them, and then just gave a new perspective on them. And that's kind of how they were able to sort of influence a lot of these other religions into turning over. Not by telling you, oh no, you're wrong, but by telling you, yes, you are right, those gods do exist, those are real people, but you shouldn't actually worship them. And this happened with Greeks, this happened with the Romans, Yahweh is the name of the Christian God in the Bible. That was a minor god in Canaanite myth. There was a sky god known as Yahweh. If you look at all of these different religions and myths and sort of read through them, what you actually get is the story of a low-level sky god that takes over, defeats all of the other gods, casts them out of their role as gods, makes them demons, and then becomes the one true god above all of the other. It's a really cool story, actually.
It's a really cool story. And to add to that, that's even further compounded with a lot of the translations of the Bible. Hell and Hades is used interchangeably in a lot of the translations of the Old Testament. Not only that, but any mentions of the wrath of Jupiter, those are still in there. So you still see people being fearful of the Roman god Jupiter, the king of the gods, the ruler of Olympus, being a viable thing, a tangible thing in the Old Testament. Clearly, you can't just say that Christianity is alone in its mythos. It very clearly did exactly what you said, where it just kind of took over and became what it is.
Yeah, I think, well, another thing that people, I think, need to realize about the way that I talk about things is that I call them stories and I call the characters, but I do the exact same thing with history. If I'm going to talk about Genghis Khan, I'm not saying that Genghis Khan's not real when I talk about him as his stories and his character, because he's still a character. That doesn't mean fictional. I'm not this kind of person who comes out and tells people what they're believing is wrong just because I don't believe it. I don't fucking know. Anything could be right. I'm not convinced by Christianity, but that doesn't mean that it's not real. If God came down from the sky and said, yeah, Christianity was right all along, I'd be like, okay, I don't fucking know. Why that doesn't surprise me. Literally anything could be true. So when I call something a story or something a character, I talk about like its origins or where it comes from and how it's evolved over time. I don't care. I'm not that attached. I don't have any hatred towards religions or anything like that to really go on. I think of everything as stories, including real world events. So it just is what it is. But I don't know. I find all of these stories fascinating and I enjoy them quite a bit.
Well, just like you, I find all of these stories fascinating. And I also love the way that the creation mythos from a lot of the different religions happen in a very similar fashion. So I'm not saying the myths are identical. What I'm saying is like the order that things are created is almost the same in every myth. It always happens that it's earth, then water, and then everything else.
Well, I've heard, it's kind of the same thing where it's like, why does every single culture have dragons? Even cultures that never came into contact with one another, they all have some variation of a dragon, a giant fire-breathing lizard. Like, why is that something that is?
Dinosaurs.
It's actually, yeah, but they didn't have dinosaurs. How did they find dinosaurs? Dinosaurs weren't alive.
They found the dinosaur bones.
And they didn't breathe fire. That's also the case. Well, they didn't have archaeology like that in a lot of these places. They weren't digging to find dinosaur bones. How the hell did they find, like, most of these places had not come into contact with dinosaurs or dinosaur bones at this point. And even if they did, why did they all come to the conclusion that these things breathe fire? It's a very specific thing to have happen. In fact, even if they did find the bones, they would have no way to understand if those things were all lizard-like. Why did they come to the conclusion that they were all reptilian? Their skulls don't look like reptile skulls. So it's like, there's just some things that are very odd. Someone told me once, and again, I think this is a relatively popular thing now, but it was kind of interesting when I heard it, is that the wars between all of the different religions seem pointless. And like, I'm not saying literal war, well, yeah, literal wars too, but just like people being like, well, you know, Christianity is correct and Judaism's wrong, and then you know, Islam is correct but this is wrong, or all this stuff. And someone was like, how do we know that all these things aren't the same? How do we know that Judaism, Christianity, Islam, you know, all of these different people, Buddhism, whatever, all these different gods and all of these different stories are just these cultures' perception of those gods, or of that one god? Like, we're all fighting and killing each other over the same dude. Jesus was like, you know, the son of God or whatever, and all that stuff happened. And then Islam, they have their Allah, or not their Allah, who is their Muhammad? They had their Muhammad, who was a thing. And, you know, and all these people were all dudes who were working with or serving God or aspects of God or whatever. But it's all like one dude, and we're all fucking fighting over because we saw certain parts of the story. It was interesting. Again, I think that no person in any of those religions would agree to that, because it would require you to have to step back from your religion and look at it and be like, is it possible that this isn't the whole story? And you can't come to the acceptance that like the Bible isn't all of it. It's not the whole thing. Maybe that's one side of the story, and maybe it's all true, but maybe it's not the whole story. Maybe there's things that were never written down that were important situations that we never got, you know? Like, maybe there's things like that happened.
The Bible is not a 100% compilation. Like,
well, again, the idea is that God put the Bible together, and if God put the Bible together, then the Bible not being a full, complete package and all of the information that you need to know would mean that God is somehow flawed, or that he made a mistake. That's
the idea was God spoke through the writers, and then the writers put the Bible together. The thing is, it has been censored by the church so much that like most editions of the Bible do not contain all accounts.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I don't really care about that. I'm saying like, I'm saying even beyond that. What if God told them, this is what we want you to write down? Let's just say this. God told you that this is what we want you to write down. Okay, but God didn't tell you everything. Like, that doesn't mean that it's a mistake that it's not in there, or that there's parts of the story that, you know, that maybe there's a reason for that. God works in mysterious ways and all that. Maybe he told them to write this down and that's what he wanted you to know. Like I said,
dangerously close to another. Rouga talks about the Bible multiple race and religion.
Yeah, I
for
didn't want
40
to.
minutes.
I didn't want to. What we're supposed to talk about is the Archangel Michael, which I think is interesting because the Archangel Michael, as a character, his whole deal is he is a warrior. I forgot, he is the protector of Israel. And he basically went on a killing spree, massacring demons as well as many of the other gods that appear. The Archangel Michael essentially builds God's kingdom in a lot of ways by removing all of the previous gods that were there before Christianity really took over as the main religion. He's essentially a god slayer, and he's a powerful warrior. He is meant at the end of time to get into a fight with the great dragon. A lot of people say the great dragon is the devil. There's actually nothing in the Bible that connects the great dragon to the devil. It is equally possible the great dragon, the devil, Satan are all different characters. There's literally nothing linking those three characters together. But anyway, he's supposed to go to war with the great dragon, and the great dragon is supposed to have an army of angels, and Michael is supposed to have his army of angels, and this is supposed to bring about the end of all things. The dude's a badass, so it would just be interesting to see like what would happen if the Archangel Michael showed up in this universe. I feel like it would be kind of broken because I feel like Michael would probably kill everyone, but I don't know. Just what do you think would happen from that sort of situation?
That's kind of what I was gonna say, is like, if he were to show up, he obviously isn't there by the entity's design, so he'd be another character that's out of place, the same way Mike Myers just kind of walked into the realm chasing after Laurie. Pyramid Head just appeared one day and has been punishing the entity and all the survivors since. The Lament configuration showed up and the Cenobites showed up. There are creatures in the realm that the entity does not have full control over. Michael would take that to the next level. He would probably just go on a murder spree. Once he realizes he can't actually kill the killers or get rid of them, he would probably start attacking the entity itself, which I guess is technically a thing he can do. I don't know. As far as we know for the entity, they are a conceptual eldritch-like being. They do have a tangible form, but only limited. It would be the same as like trying to perceive one of the H.P. Lovecraft mythos creatures. If you perceived their true form, you would go absolutely insane. If you perceived Michael's true form, you'd go insane. Like, it's the same kind of thing, so I'm guessing
if you perceive Michael's true form, you go insane.
You go blind, you go deaf, and yeah, you go insane.
This is from the movies?
No.
You're talking about Michael the Archangel.
Yeah.
That's not true. No, that's not true. You don't go insane. I thought you were talking about Michael Myers. You don't go insane from perceiving.
If you perceive an Archangel's true form, yes, you do.
No, you don't. You're talking about the ones, not Seraphim. They're the ones with 6 wings that cover their faces with their wing. Yeah, that's not Michael though. We already know what Michael looks like. He looks essentially like a human but with wings. Gabriel too. Gabriel's a messenger. Like, you could perceive their true forms.
No, those aren't their true forms.
Those are their true forms. Yeah, there are messenger angels and angels that interact with humans that look like just dudes. But then there's other angels that are described, like the one that's a giant wheel that spins with covered in eyes, or the ones that have 3 faces. There's another one that has 6 wings. It covers its face that sings to God, and they say that if you see his face, you can go mad. Those do exist. Those are things. But no, Michael's just like a dude with wings. There's nothing really. He's pretty much always perceived as a man with a flaming sword and a banner that like goes into battle against the great dragon. Yeah, he has a form.
Okay, well, never mind then. But still, I'm fairly certain he'd be able to, because he is a higher being, the same way the entity is, he'd probably be able to, like, perceive its true form and fight it, the same way he's supposed to fight the Great Serpent. Michael would not be a part of this realm. He would not be a part of the killing. He would not be a part of the endless cycle. He would break it. He would break it down to whatever he can. And whatever he can't, he would, I don't know, cast into hell, something like that.
Cool to see Archangel Michael go to war with an army of fucking movie killers. Like movie serial, like horror movie monsters and shit, and just fight like the entity in this other realm. That would be a cool
really
movie.
Interesting to see though. Would be Michael interact with the Cenobites.
I don't think there'd be much interaction. I think he'd be disgusted by it. Very clearly, would be absolutely disgusted by it.
Doesn't have like a level of power.
Yeah. No, I mean, at one point in the comics, he grew to be bigger than the planet Earth, and then he just like held planet Earth in his hand. So yeah, he's really powerful.
So would he have enough power to go against an Archangel though?
Probably not. If it is true, again, it's mostly implied, not directly stated, but if it is true that Michael the Archangel went after and killed all of the other gods like Zeus and stuff, then we would have to compare him to all of those gods, and that is considerably stronger than just holding the earth in your hand. Pinhead really wouldn't compare.
I guess, but we never see Zeus like hold the earth in his hand in any of his myths.
But he does dominate the Titans. There are gods that are below him that are capable of dealing with primordial beings that did create the universe.
Well,
so it's really like
himself is still scared of Nyx. Like Hypnos literally ran to his mother, the primordial incarnation of darkness.
That's
so
true.
Zeus clearly does not deal with primordials.
No, he does. Not all primordials are equal. I think Apollo has myths where he's defeated primordials and beaten them, and Apollo's nowhere near.
No.
Yeah, Apollo. I'm almost positive Apollo defeats a primordial.
Apollo never defeats a primordial. Apollo succeeds a primordial in that he succeeds Helios, and he gains a lot of the same powers of a primordial, but he never defeats a primordial.
I'll have to look into that. I'm almost positive there's a story where Apollo, basically every morning before dawn, the reason why darkness goes away or whatever is because he has to fight a primordial off every day, and then that's where the sun comes up. Something like that. I'll have to look into it, but I think he fights against a primordial every morning. I'm almost positive, and he beats them consistently every single morning. I might be wrong about that. Maybe someone in the comments can tell me otherwise.
Yeah, maybe.
And then you have like the Titans, and the Titans have all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, I mean, Atlas was locked to hold up the entire world and the stars and shit, and Zeus was the one who locked him there. So Zeus had the power to at least overpower Atlas. And in Greek myth, the stars are infinite. So he's just holding up like an infinite number of stars. So even if we're just doing that, just comparing that amount right there, that would make Zeus significantly stronger than Pinhead. I don't think there's much to argue that the Greek gods would be much stronger than Pinhead. Pinhead's pretty low tier. He's not a god. He's not like creating universes. In fact, Pinhead is a servant to Leviathan that is the god of that realm. So Pinhead's not even in charge of the realm that he lives in. He's just another Cenobite. He's the most powerful Cenobite, but he's not even like the leader.
Oh god, you end up in a fight with the entity and somehow you've now angered the Leviathan.
That would be like an interesting poker night. All these like cosmic gods that don't really have forms, the entity and the Leviathan just being like, hey bro, you want to like...
the table.
Yeah, like a movie night or something? I don't know.
Just betting with people's lives instead of like monetary chips. Just like, okay, I bet 20 billion souls.
What do they do for fun when they just hang out, just chill somewhere?
They just tear universes apart passively.
Yeah. Because Leviathan, I think he looks like a giant, like, diamond-shaped thing. Almost like that green Sims diamond, but it's like a giant, like, metal-looking construct. He looks like a ship or something in the sky. Then the entity, I guess, is just the planet they're on.
So
if it's even a planet.
The entity, like, the closest we've come to seeing its true form, other than, like, the spider legs that you kind of see during the trials, the closest that we've seen its true form, I believe, was in a cinematic trailer for one of the killers. You get to see, like, a glimpse into the sky, basically, as the killer's being revealed, and it shows, like, this eldritch spider kind of thing.
Why is it always fucking spiders? Pennywise, the same thing. Like, his truest form is like a fucking spider. I think it's because spiders...
Its truest form is a spider.
Yeah. Well, the reason why they do that for Pennywise is because his true form is not a spider, but it's the closest, because humans can't understand or comprehend his true form, so that's the closest thing that they can actually get. And I guess Stephen King just took the weirdest looking animal he possibly could. Like, yeah, sure, let's do that one. But it's always fucking spider.
I say spider because it's like the easiest way to conjure up the imagery, but the closest thing, imagine a 200-legged spider that's impossibly tall and could easily surround the world if it just kind of like came down.
I fucking hated the spider in the new It movie where they gave like Pennywise's head. Like, doesn't that completely defeat the purpose of it being this thing that can't be understood? It's so weird. Like, shouldn't you have made like some weird mutant spider that just looked strange and just odd? But you're like, no, it's just a spider with Pennywise's head on top. It looked so fucking stupid. Know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the villain from the first Wreck-It Ralph. When he turned into the giant spider thing. That's what the spider
I know who you're talking about
in the remake. It looked exactly like that. I thought it was so goofy. I'm like, this is a horror movie, right? Why are there so many unintentionally funny scenes in this horror movie? It's like in the first It, again, still the remake. He's trying to terrify Beverly, and then he just starts fucking dancing and kicking his legs back over. And it's like, am I supposed to find this scary? This is hilarious. Why is this so funny? It's weird. It's like, this is not scary. Anyway,
it's actually a really good transition. So Pennywise Pennywise from the It movies or the Deadlights from Stephen King's novel and Stephen King's universe. Basically, the Deadlights are their own entity-like creation, and they also feed off of fear. So I figured like they'd make a really good killer for the entity. And I feel like the entity could easily convince it to come in, especially since the entity could probably like pull in the Losers Club as survivors if it needed to, just to give Pennywise like that extra little like come over here and you get to torture these people forever kind of thing.
So my question with this one and why I think this one will be kind of odd is because sort of like the Lamb, I think that they're in conflict with one another. They both are trying to take the same thing. How is the entity going to take the emotions of the people who Pennywise is killing when Pennywise wants to take their fear for himself? They're both feeding off the same source. Pennywise being there will lessen what the entity can take. The entity can take other stuff, like other emotions, but all of the fear is going to be sucked up by Pennywise. It doesn't seem like the entity would benefit from having Pennywise there. And once Pennywise gets there, I mean, is the entity even powerful enough to control or do anything with him? Because he's like a godlike being himself. He's basically like the entity in his own realm.
He's similar. I mean, he's a shape-shifting fear-monger, but I don't think he has the same level of power that the entity does to be able to like create his own realm of torture and fear the way the entity did.
Does though. I mean, the underground sewers under Derry is his own realm. He shapes it however he wants. There are constantly shifting labyrinth of tunnels and different things that he just controls with his own will, and that's just an aspect of
I didn't
Pennywise.
remember. So if that's the case, then this ends up being more of if Pennywise and the entity met, do they just like duke it out for control over the realm?
They're essentially the same character. In a lot of ways, they're the same character.
So do they just fight for control over the realm? Like, no, these are all mine.
Yeah, probably. It kind of seems that way. I mean, the thing is, Pennywise basically uses Derry the same way that Entity has his own realm. But if Pennywise can take control of the Entity's realm and be like,
he wouldn't need Derry anymore.
He wouldn't need Derry. It would essentially be a more efficient way of collecting the fear that he wants, rather than using Derry and only taking it from children. You know, and then he can have all these killers causing the fear for him. So he's almost got like employees now, so he doesn't even have to do it himself.
He's in the entity would just be competing for turf here.
Kind of. The only problem that I would see is that the entity constantly has people die and then brings it back to life. And there's no evidence that we see that
Pennywise would be able to do that.
He could even do that. Yeah, so essentially when he brings people there, he would not want the killers to keep killing them. He would want the killers to make them afraid so he could feed on them.
So Pennywise would probably like the permanent chase scenes, whereas the entity actually wants like the deaths.
Yeah, I could see Pennywise getting rid of basically everyone except for maybe Freddy Krueger. You know, like keep them afraid for as long as you can, and then I'll eat them, and we'll make some kind of deal. You know what I mean? That maybe could be kind of. But honestly, I kind of see Pennywise as a really shitty. Like I get that the space turtle camp comes in and helps the kids and all that. I get that, but even before that, he really only went after children because he's not actually that good at making people scared. You'd think that if he was that amazing at making people afraid, that he would be able to do it to the adults. The entity doesn't only make adults scared, but he makes like horror movie protagonists terrified.
I thought like Pennywise's whole thing was like the reason he didn't go after the adults is because he was more easily able to feed off the fear because of the imagination of children. So that's also why imagination was able to beat Pennywise in the books and in the movie.
Well, that's another thing. Entity's power isn't based off of imagination.
No, the entity is just like a more solid thing. That's why, again, like Pennywise being given free reign in a realm like the entities, he'd have a more limited food supply, but the entity could still feed him scraps.
Well, would he even be able to manipulate the entities? Like, Pennywise is in our world. Why does he only have his power related to Derry? Like, why doesn't he control the entire world in the same way? Why does he just turn our entire planet into his own imagination-fueled hellscape that he can then, like, feed off the fear of the entire population of Earth?
As far as I understood, the reason he had to limit himself to Derry is because, like, after he crash-landed, because Pennywise is technically an alien, after he crash-landed, he was injured, and he needed to feed in order to heal and get back to his full potential.
But he never got to that that potential because it seems like there were generations where he was at Derry still feeding. How long has he been at Derry before the start of the story? Because all of the adults were aware it was going on, and this was something that continued to happen. Apparently, even the adults had some of this stuff happen when they were kids. So he's been doing this for a while. How long was it going to take before he got his full power?
That's a good question. Stephen King, we need answers.
I mean, I get it, but I've always seen Pennywise as like the shittiest dark god in fiction because he only goes after children. Children were able to overcome him. Children eventually stopped being scared of him. Even if you want to say that they only overcame him because of the turtle, fine. They overcame their fear of him by themselves. That wasn't due to the influence of the turtle. If you're a god of fear that feeds on the fear of others, and like 6 fucking 10-year-olds are no longer scared of you, you got problems. Like, that's an issue, man.
Yeah, when
like,
a 10-year-old can literally beat you with his asthma inhaler, you got a problem.
Yeah, even if Pennywise does get interested in the entity's realm and wants to take it over, I kind of see it as being like, who gives a shit? Like, he's kind of shitty.
I feel like even if Pennywise got to like the point where he was interested in taking over the entity's realm, the entity would slap him and say, bro, this ain't no amateur hour.
I think it's very possible that most of the survivors won't even be afraid of Pennywise. I think that Ash Williams being in the universe of Dead by Daylight kind of breaks it, because I do not believe Ash Williams would, not for a second, would be afraid of anything that happens in Dead by Daylight, and that he would be able to feed much emotions off of him. But he most certainly is not going to be afraid of Pennywise. That's just not happening. No. At least not in the way that he would be able to feed off of it that much. Like, I mean, you can argue that Ash is scared of the Deadites by the way he reacts to the Deadites always popping up. He'd be like, oh, you know, like his like crazy over-the-top reactions.
I think you can also argue that like Ash would be terrified of something like Dredge or Unknown, something he can't properly fathom what this is. And
I don't think it matters that he can't properly. I mean, it's not like he hasn't fought demons that are like beyond his understanding before. I mean, hell, the demon that had him locked in the cabin for like 3 days didn't even have a physical form.
No, but I think just part of it's that Ash can't fight back in this situation. He's been rendered helpless.
He couldn't fight back then either. Not against the woods. It wasn't until the chick came and read the book and gave it a physical form that he was actually able to fight against it. But before that, he couldn't fight against it at all. It was just the woods itself. It was just this force that existed. It turned all of his friends into demons, and he can kill his friends, but he couldn't fight back against the force in the woods at all. There's actually quite a bit, and I believe in the show as well, there's multiple demons that he fights that he is not capable of killing. However, it should be noted, he doesn't have the Kandarian dagger in the Dead by Daylight. He gets the Kandarian dagger in Evil Dead 2, and then he gets it again in the show. The Kandarian dagger can kill anything. That's the whole point of the Kandarian dagger. Technically, if he had that dagger,
dagger, he could stab the entity.
Yeah, he should be able to kill it. He could literally stab it to the ground and kill the entity, because it has the ability to kill literally anything, even things that are unkillable. It can kill demons, it can kill gods, it destroys the souls and the existence.
Oh no, he'll kill Maurice.
Yeah, he could essentially kill anything it wants if he had the Kandarian dagger, but they don't give it to him. So I guess the entity just brought him in and was like, no, you leave that there. Like, you don't bring that. But
I'm fairly certain Ash Williams' lore is that like when the entity grabbed him, it reverted him to like base human. So none of that like chainsaw arm. We want you not to be able to fight back, and we want you to be scared of these things again. So we're gonna make you human.
The only place where it would make sense for him to take Ash is like the beginning of the first Evil Dead movie. Because if you take him by the end of the Evil Dead movie, he's kind of like a demon slaying badass, and you can't take him at any point in Evil Dead 2 or beyond. Because at that point, there's nothing you can really do to him. He's already gone insane and being in a cabin fighting demons for several days, and he's just like, he's a completely different dude at that point. I don't see you actually giving him any real fear, and I don't think Pennywise is going to be able to do anything. There's a lot of characters that I don't think Pennywise is going to be able to do anything to Bill. He's a fucking Vietnam War vet who then had to fight an army of zombies for years. Like, I know there's a lot of characters that are in Dead by Daylight that I don't think Pennywise would even be able to scare. So I think he might be fucked. He might just leave. He might just be like, I can't. No, let's just go back to Derry and scare the kids. Are we basically done? Did you want to talk about another character? I think that this file is going to be too big to export it onto my computer.
I think we should just end it here. We don't get to talk about the last guy.
Okay, yeah. Who was the last? Oh, Chris Walker? I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. I don't think we're going to say anything new with that character.
He was kind of a boring character compared to the rest that we talked about.
God damn, dude, you had one good character, and it was mine. No, Pennywise was all right.
It was an interesting conversation about Pennywise.
But that's going to be it. That's our list for today. Thank you you guys for stopping by. Dan, you want to tell them where you can find them? Where they can find you?
Oh,
Yeah,
you can find me on YouTube under Wizard of Strategy. You can also join in the Discord. I am live with Rouga every Saturday.
Groovy. Okay. But that's all we got for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, and join the membership. Remember, to join the membership, you get videos early. And always remember, y'all stay safe out there, you hear? And always remember, y'all stay safe out there, you hear? My voice cracked.